The theme for tonight, which I developed in conversation with Duncan and Esperanza, is start where you are. This is for everyday peace and nonviolence. And we'll do a little grounding to start. I will give a little talk, and then we'll move into some breakout discussions, which I hope will allow you a chance for reflection and also to connect with one another. As we will talk about tonight, building community is one of the most important everyday practices for peace and nonviolence. So we'll be doing a bit of that on the call. And then we'll have some Q&A and a thing just to give you a sense of where we're heading tonight. So I'd love to offer us a moment to arrive together in this space. And since the theme is start where you are, I'd love you to just take a look around the room and notice where you are right now. I'm in Costa Rica. It's raining right now. It's evening, so the light is fading. Just orienting to your own surroundings, including the Zoom screen. And then if you'd like, I invite you to close your eyes, or you can just gaze softly at something pleasant in your space and surroundings. And notice how you're arriving where you are tonight. How's your body? Or it's maybe not night where you are. I know we have folks all over the world. Just noticing how you're arriving in this moment. How's your energy? And just observing without any judgment, just noticing how you are in this present moment. Notice any emotions that are present, any feelings, sensations. How is your heart? How is your spirit as you land here? And feel your feet connected with the floor, the earth. And sense the support of the earth beneath you and around you. In the air you are breathing. And begin to sense into the community on this call that we are connected through our beautiful planetary home, which we share. Connected through our Zoom screens and all the cables and connections that allow for this to take place. And connected with a mutual interest in peace and nonviolence. And what a gift it is to be in a space where we share that interest and connection. So take one more deep breath in, filling your body, the deepest breath you've taken all day. Perhaps releasing with a sigh. And welcoming yourself to this space. And I welcome you. Thank you. So I wanted to begin with some of the questions that I proposed in the session description that we will try to answer, maybe not definitive answers, but we'll work our way around. How do we cultivate peace, not only in the world, but in our own hearts, homes, and relationships? What is the relationship between inner and outer change? How might we understand nonviolence as love in action? And how might this help us cultivate a sense of agency and hope in harrowing times? And a question I always ask myself when I am invited to do a talk is, what could I share that might be most useful? And I find that's always hard to know. And with this talk in particular, I just taught a course, a 3-week-long course, which is basically, it's an intensive course on nonviolence. So there's a challenge of trying to, select what one shares and distilling information. In some ways, I was thinking it's almost harder for me to plan a 1-hour talk than a 3-week class, because you have to really choose. But I have tried to choose lovingly this evening what I would share with you. I do hope it's useful to you where you are. And some key messages I just wanted to foreground tonight. This idea that comes from Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh of peace as every step, peace and nonviolence as every step, which means that everything we do has the potential to contribute toward a more just, loving, caring, peaceful world. And we can start now, wherever we are, just as you are. And just based on your choosing to be here, I sense you have already started. So that is my also another assumption I have going into this call. Another key message is we need all of us. And part of what we'll be talking about tonight are the different roles that people can play, and that each of us really has a role to play in movements for creating more liberation, more justice, more peace, and nonviolence in the world. I wanted to start by naming and sharing a little bit about my lineages and my relation to this topic of nonviolence. The picture on the left is the Presbyterian church where I grew up, Parkwood Presbyterian Church in Allison Park, Pennsylvania. I saw there were some folks from Pennsylvania on the call. And so I grew up with Christian roots, Christian heritage. But I'd say as a teenager, I started questioning some things. I listened to Marie Dennis's talk last week, which was about nonviolence and also about the Christian roots of nonviolence. And listening to her speak about it, I thought to myself, wow, if someone had talked about Jesus in this way, I don't think I would have ever left the church. Like, it was so inspiring. And so I remain deeply inspired by Jesus as a nonviolent revolutionary and someone who really embodied love in action, and who's an example of someone whose life force energy continues to permeate love throughout the world. And I think that's something we can all aspire for our actions to continue, our loving actions to continue beyond our living bodies. And as a college student in the late 90s, dating myself there, I was introduced to the work of Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh through his book, Peace is Every Step. And I fell in love with that book and the idea of cultivating peace in every step. And he just really had me hooked. And so from that moment on, however imperfectly, that has been the direction I've been trying to move in my life, that every step I take, every action I make, I hope for it to create greater peace in the world, which isn't to say it always does. There's no perfection here, but there's that spirit of intention. And then the picture I have on the right, and sorry, you might hear my dog chirping in the background. She's sitting next to me. The picture on the right is the UPeace campus. And so reading Thich Nhat Hanh's work and trying to practice mindfulness led me to the University for Peace in 2009 to study peace education. One of my dear peace education classmates from that time is on the call, Don Warmbrand. So happy you are here. So his teachings led me to UPeace to study peace education, and that is the work that I've been doing since that time. The idea being that education can maintain the status quo, it can be a vehicle for violence, or it can be a vehicle for peace. And yeah, the field of peace education is trying to move education in that direction. And as Sister Esperanza mentioned, I don't need to go into too many details, but I did a variety of work around peace education and nonviolence education, including working for the Meta Center for Nonviolence, which you'll see some of their resources pop up in this presentation as well. So I worked with them, and then after pursuing my PhD, I returned to UPeace as an assistant professor. And in naming all of that, I think it's important to know where people come from. I would love to know more about where each one of you is coming from. And I think it's also important to name that I'm in Costa Rica. I'm from the United States. And I think many of you, I know we have an international audience on this call, but I sensed in the check-ins that a lot of folks are in the United States. And I mean, almost no matter where we are in the world right now, there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of suffering. And being in Costa Rica, I'm sitting in a place of relative safety, comfort, and privilege. And so I just want to name that. That's where I am speaking from today. But I care deeply about many things that are happening right now. And yeah, I hope that some of the things I share can help you in your context to navigate these very challenging times. I wanted to say a little bit more about Thich Nhat Hanh and his approach to engaged Buddhism. He coined the phrase engaged Buddhism. And he started out, he wanted to be a monk from a very young age. He was born in Vietnam, went into the monastery as soon as he could. But then, of course, outside the monastery, there was war. And after some time, he thought, how can I stay in the monastery when all of this is happening outside? And so he really developed this practice and this path of engaged work, what he calls engaged Buddhism. And he was very involved in relief work, peace work, humanitarian work in Vietnam, up until he was exiled from Vietnam in the late 60s. I have this photo here of him with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. I recommend reading his biography when you can, or reading any of his work. But just to say, they had a partnership, a relationship, and it's said that after their meeting, their conversation definitely influenced King in taking a stronger anti-war stance against the Vietnam War. So I wanted to share with you some of the core teachings that I have learned through studying under Thich Nhat Hanh within the Plum, the broader community that we're a part of. It's called the Plum Village community. And so I wanted to share some of the teachings that feel most essential to me related to tonight's topic. And the first one is peace is every step, which I already mentioned. And so this sense of how can every step we take, every action we make, contribute to greater peace in the world. And I think that is the heart of it for me. The next teaching is being present, and being present to this moment, which we also might look at as bearing witness. And part of this has to do with raising our own awareness, and we'll talk a little bit about mindful media consumption as well. So when we landed here today, and I invited us to do some breathing together, it was to help us arrive, and it was to help us become present. And in our modern distracted world, there's so many things pulling our attention at any given moment, and being present to the present moment is, I think, a radical act. And it's also only from a place of presence that we can really discern what kinds of actions to take. So there's this connection between the inner work that we do, and we'll keep circling around this theme tonight as well, the importance of the inner work to support the outer work, which is the essence of the idea of engaged Buddhism, that we have inner practices, whether that's meditation or prayer or anything that helps you to be grounded and centered and compassionate, that is always in relationship with the work that we're doing in the world and supports the work that we're doing in the world. So these present practices are really important. This is a poem I wanted to share with you by the poet Nikita Gill, who I really recommend following. I feel like she has a poem for everything, and her poems just land right in my heart every time. And she wrote, "Everything is on fire, but everyone I love is doing beautiful things and trying to make life worth living. And I don't have to believe in everything, but I believe in that." And yeah, I hold on to this poem, and I wanted to name that we're in a moment where it feels like everything is on fire. And I mean that globally. And I started to make a list of the things that I wanted to name, and I started to cry because there are so many things to name. The list is endless. The wars in Gaza and Ukraine and Sudan and many other places, the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the blockade on humanitarian aid, the climate catastrophe and ecological collapse, the racist attacks on immigrant communities and the state violence associated with that, the rise of authoritarianism and fascism in many different parts of the world, and the attacks on queer and trans communities and their safety and rights. And naming and acknowledging the present moment, I believe, is a crucial practice that we need to be present, and we need to name and acknowledge what is going on. And the great James Baldwin wrote that nothing can be changed until it is faced. And so this practice of facing the present moment is really an essential practice of everyday peace and nonviolence. But I think we also have to find this awareness between raising our awareness and doom scrolling. I don't know, I hope I'm not the only one who falls in that trap sometimes. But there is this balance of needing to bear witness to what is happening in the moment and staying informed and being aware of what's happening in our communities. But then that can also teeter to just staying in like a rabbit hole or a vacuum and actually impacting our ability to act. It can become very like debilitating almost to not, and can keep us from acting if we stay in that space. So on one hand, from a grounded place of presence, we're more likely to see clearly and be able to take loving action. But then we want to balance the awareness with then taking action. So for example, last weekend, I was watching multiple crises unfold on my phone, and I was very much stuck in this loop, and just kind of scrolling for updates. And at some point I stopped and said, okay, what is something I can do right now? So I wrote to a representative, I donated to a bail fund, the small actions that we can take to take action around the things that we're seeing and that we care about. And I put a few resources. These slides are full of resources. So afterwards, they'll be made available to you. There's lots of links. But there's a book I recommend called Bearing Witness by Bernie Glassman of the Zen Peacemakers that I recommend on the topic of bearing witness. And it's also, the book is about an engaged Buddhist practice of Zen peacemaking. I put here the example of waging nonviolence. So there are some really wonderful alternative media sources that that lift up nonviolent movements and provide that kind of analysis, and waging nonviolence is one of them. And then within the Plum Village community, there's an app. You can download it on your phone, and they actually have a device meditation, which is really lovely. You can actually do it while you're looking at your phone. And it helps you to try, because yeah, it can become a mindful or a spiritual practice to try to engage with news and information and social media and things like that. And notice how it's affecting our minds and bodies and hearts, and then noticing when it's time to take a break from it as well. Another teaching that I wanted to share was stopping and slowing down as a radical act. I have a picture of a Costa Rican sloth on this slide for inspiration. They are very inspiring creatures. And I have a quote here. Yes, sweetheart.
I'm gonna do some of my homework with Hanh.
Okay, your homework's over on the table there.
I already got my social studies out.
Great.
What does naciones mean?
Naciones is nations.
No.
Sorry for 1 second. I'm also a mother, as Esperanza mentioned. You'll have to show it to me.
Huh?
Can you show it to me?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Sorry, I lost the slide there. So my other teacher, and maybe that was my daughter giving us a moment to pause and stop, actually. When you go to monasteries in the Plum Village tradition, I'm not sure, sweetie, I'll have to help you when I'm done with the call, okay? There are bells of mindfulness that ring out throughout the day, and they're an invitation to stop and pause. And when you're not used to it, you can be annoyed by it at first, like, oh, I'm walking, like I don't want to stop. But once you get used to the practice, it becomes this beautiful invitation throughout your day to pause and stop and breathe and come back to yourself. One of my other teachers, Bayo Akomolafe, he's from Nigeria, and he often says, the times are urgent, let us slow down. And that is, I believe, comes from the Yoruba tradition of which he is a part. And I think this is such an important teaching because sometimes speed is required. Like if there is a fire, you need to put it out quickly. So it's not to say that there aren't moments where you need to act quickly. But there are many issues where we maybe rush towards solutions without slowing down and thinking about what really needs to happen. And so this idea of stopping and slowing down, I think, is an everyday peace practice as well. And along all of these lines, another practice is focus. And I wanted to share this quote from Thomas Merton, the American Trappist monk and anti-war activist. He said, there is a pervasive form of contemporary violence to which the idealist most easily succumbs, activism and overwork. The rush and pressure of modern life are a form, perhaps the most common form of its innate violence. To allow oneself to be carried away by a multitude of conflicting concerns, to surrender to too many demands, to commit oneself to too many projects, to want to help everyone with everything, is to succumb to violence. The frenzy of our activism neutralizes our work for peace. It destroys our own inner capacity for peace. It destroys the fruitfulness of our own work because it kills the root of inner wisdom, which makes the work fruitful. So again, there's this connection between our inner wisdom, our inner work, and the outer work. And I think for many of us, yeah, there's so many things that are challenging, so many forms of violence that we are seeing and experiencing in our communities, and it can feel this frenzy of wanting to do everything. And I think here Merton is calling on us to focus. You don't have to do everything, but please do something. And this connects, well, I'm going to jump ahead to this slide actually. Audre Lorde talked about how there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. And so when you understand that everything as interconnected, and when you wholeheartedly and intersectionally work on an issue, then you're touching everything. And so there's this sense of interconnectedness among the issues. We don't have to work on everything because everything is connected. But when we also do need to work on things with that awareness that everything is connected as well. Relating to burnout, I wanted to share this activist vow, which is by a Buddhist teacher named Musjim Ikeda, who teaches in the San Francisco Bay Area. And she wrote, "Aware of suffering and injustice, I, Stephanie Marie Knox Steiner, or insert your name, am working to create a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world. I promise for the benefit of all to practice self-care, mindfulness, healing, and joy. I vow not to burn out." And so here she's also highlighting the importance for each of us to not burn out, that there's definitely a tendency and a possibility for burnout with so many things going on. And so practicing self-care, healing, and joy, and not just self-care, community care as well, right? Is really important for our peace and nonviolence work. And I wanted to mention nervous system care as a specific practice for inner peace and as an antidote to burnout. We could have a whole other session on the nervous system and nervous system care. And part of meditation or prayer and inner peace practices, they're practices that help us to regulate our nervous systems. But there are many other practices that help a lot as well. I introduced you to one as we sat down, which was orienting to your space. And it might seem like it's a very simple practice, but it also helps the body to feel safer, and it lets the nervous system relax a little bit when you are aware of your surroundings, especially if you're in a new place. There are many other practices. If you've experienced a sharp emotion like anger or frustration, shaking is a wonderful practice. You might even try it a little bit right now. Yeah, there you go. And just shaking the body from head to toe, in the way that animals do it. Like, have you seen a dog? If a dog gets startled on the street, right afterwards, they'll give their whole body a shake, and then they're over it. And I find when I'm walking my dog, something will happen, a loud noise will happen, and she'll shake it off. And meanwhile, I'm stuck in it for like the rest of the day. So this is why something like shaking is a really important practice. And there are others like swaying and squeezing opposite arms is another nervous system care practice. Also extending your exhalations, making your exhale longer than your inhale is a way to help kick in your parasympathetic nervous system. So yeah, those are just a few practices I wanted to introduce for our inner care that I think are really important for these times. So another core teaching of Thich Nhat Hanh, of many nonviolence practitioners, including the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, is this notion of building beloved community. And Nhat Hanh coined this word, which I love very much, interbeing, which articulates the beyond interconnectedness of the world. That, you know, when we say interconnected, it can sound like things are separate but connected. And interbeing is the sense that there's no separation among anything. Everything exists because of everything else. And building beloved community is an embodied practice of interbeing. Thich Nhat Hanh is a beautiful book. I have a chapter linked here. It's a conversation between Thich Nhat Hanh and Daniel Berrigan, who was a priest. And it's a conversation between them, and the chapter is about communities of resistance. And they talk about communities which are expressing daily life, reality, and are doing resistance work together. And Daniel Berrigan said, and this was, you know, during the anti-war movement in the 60s that he was very much involved with, as was Thich Nhat Hanh, people began to say that it was not enough to perform one action and disperse. People had to stay together and prepare for trial, talking around the country, preparing legal defense, raising money, educating other people. And this could be expressed as communities of resistance or everyday resistance. Like, what are the actions beyond, you know, a protest that contribute to resistance? And I think this is a helpful idea for us right now. The teacher, Margaret Wheatley, uses the phrase islands of sanity, which I also really love and appreciate, of trying to come together with people amidst the chaos of these times and bond together and do inner work together and also take action together. This is a picture of my daughter from a few years ago. And as Esperanza mentioned, there's a thread of humor and peace through my work, which is also a whole other conversation. But I did want to name the practice of, like, specific to interbeing, the interbeing of joy and grief and pain and rage, and joy as a liberation practice. And one of my favorite lines in the Order of Interbeing mindfulness trainings, it's in the second training, says, "We can live happily in the present moment simply by remembering that we already have more than enough conditions to be happy." And so even amidst the suffering and the chaos of the moment, can we find these moments and these conditions of happiness? And that can be a liberation practice, especially when we're doing it with others. And yeah, it's a necessary act for sustaining ourselves as well. So I wanted to come back to the topic of nonviolence. I know in this, you know, this talk is a part of a webinar series. Marie Dennis, if you weren't at that talk, I really recommend going and checking out the recording, which is available online. Maybe Esperanza or Duncan can drop the link in the chat. It's a wonderful introduction to nonviolence. And I, like, thumbs up, heart, everything that she shared in that talk, and was glad that I am glad that I saw it. And I'll be repeating some of the themes a little bit, but mostly just, you know, touching back to some of the things that she said. In the practice of nonviolence, we can connect inner and outer change. This is a calligraphy by Nhat Hanh, and one of his core teachings, peace in oneself and peace in the world. And it's not linear. It doesn't mean you need to have perfect peace in yourself to make peace in the world. That is not what he meant at all. But he did mean that there is a relationship between our inner peace and outer peace, and that cultivating our inner peace can help us to cultivate more peace beyond ourselves as well. There's another teacher and activist whose work I really love, Grace Lee Boggs, who said something very similar: transform yourself to transform the world. She was a civil and labor rights organizer and activist. And so this sense of we need to hold both of those at the same time, the inner transformation and the outer transformation, and we can't do one without the other. Adrienne Marie Brown, in her work around emergent strategy, highlighted this principle through the idea of fractals. And fractals are never-ending patterns in nature. You have some examples on the right-hand side. Fractals are infinitely complex patterns that are self-similar across different scales. They're created by repeating a simple process over and over in an ongoing feedback loop. And in her work on emergent strategy, Adrienne Marie Brown is looking at nature and how nature organizes and how we can learn from that in organizing ourselves as humans who are also part of the earth, who are the earth. And this is the book. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it yet. But the idea of fractals, it relates to this notion of inner and outer transformation. And the idea is that what we practice at the small scale sets the patterns for the whole system. And so if we're seeking collective liberation, we also need to be practicing that in our daily relationships, in our parenting, which I will be the first to tell you, it's, the family unit and, practicing in our closest interpersonal relationships can be some of the hardest places. That's where the rubber really meets the road. But it's this idea that the little things that we are doing are affecting the larger system. And that also connects to the idea of interbeing, that when you understand everything as being connected, then anything you're doing at the small scale is also affecting the larger scale. Which then leads us to this topic of nonviolence. And I wanted to pause for a moment and invite you in the chat to share the first things that come to your mind when you complete the sentence, nonviolence is. Would love to just take a few moments, few breaths for folks to add some thoughts in the chat around that. Nonviolence is the way. Yes. Hat tip to Musty. Thank you, Adi. Compassion, speech and actions that add benefit and non-harming. Peaceful. Let's see. Making sure that empathy and understanding where others are coming from leads your actions. Beautiful. The communal state of well-being, acting from our true self. Nonviolence is always starting over. Love this so much. I would love to save this chat. On the right-hand side, you'll see there the photo is a poem that I did with my students. I have an activity that's very similar. I thought for the sake of time, we would just do it quickly in the chat. But when you put all of these together, you can then rearrange them a little bit and it becomes this really beautiful poem. Love, a spirituality, way of life, using peaceful means, responding to violence with unexpected and kind and wise. These are beautiful. Desiring the good for oneself and others. Well, that last one is a perfect segue to my next slide. Thanks, Esperanza. but I wanted to get a little nerdy on you, and this comes from Michael Nagler's work. He's the founder of the Metta Center, and he wrote a book called Search for a Nonviolent Future. So I am not a Sanskrit scholar, but I learned this through him, that nonviolence is a translation of the Sanskrit word ahimsa, meaning non, and himsa meaning the desire harm. So it's more than just not harming. It's actually the absence of the desire to harm, which, in a positive note, we can envision as love in action. And if there's anyone on the call who has a better knowledge of Sanskrit than I do, I welcome you to, to fact check me on that. But that is what I've learned through Michael. Just some key messages, and many of these came up in Marie Dennis's talk. That nonviolence is, many of these have come up in what you shared in the chat. Nonviolence is a personal, relational, and political process, and nonviolence is not the opposite of violence or the absence of violence or conflict. It's this positive force of love in action. It's not passive, it's active. And there's a distinction between nonviolence and pacifism, which Marie also went into in her talk. Nonviolence can be learned, just as violence is learned. Nonviolence is our no and our yes, which we'll talk a little bit more about that. Means are ends, meaning that if we want a nonviolent and peaceful outcome, then how we go about it is as important as the outcome. And then this idea that we can practice love in action every day in all aspects of our lives, while also working for broader social and systemic change. This idea of peace as every step and everyday resistance. And thank you so much for sharing those beautiful thoughts on nonviolence in the chat. I'm using peace and nonviolence together, and I would say they overlap immensely, and they can be used interchangeably. Nonviolence, I guess I see nonviolence as a force and a power that we can tap into both within ourselves and collectively when we act together. And I wanted to share this vision of peace that comes from the Earth Charter, which recognizes that peace is the wholeness created by right relationships with oneself, other persons, other cultures, other life, Earth, and the larger whole of which we are a part. And peace and nonviolence are fundamentally about relationships and the sense of interbeing, that when you understand the world as interbeing, as everything being connected, then violence no longer makes sense, because you understand that if you're harming another, you're harming yourself, and that it affects everything. Nonviolence, that translation into English, it makes it so that it seems like it's a negative word, but it's about our no and it's about our yes. And it is the no to injustice and violence and oppression. The no might manifest as protest and resistance, which is necessary. The no is more obstructive, what Gandhi called satyagraha, or clinging to truth or soul force. That's the nonviolent direct action, the resistance. What Joanna Macy in the work that Reconnects calls holding actions, like actions to stop harm and reduce harm. Those are all absolutely necessary. But nonviolence is also our yes. It's our yes to the world we want to build together and building it. This is what Gandhi called constructive program in the Indian freedom struggle. That was things like making their own clothes. It was harvesting salt and things like that, things that impact everyday life, that are building the world that we want to live in. And part of that is imagining and dreaming of the world we want to live in and acting towards it today. And so all of this to say, thinking about starting where you are, some of the questions that come up are, where are you and who are you? And what can you do where you are as you are? I'm going to share a few models. One is finding your place in the social change ecosystem, and I'll share a link for that as well. And then all of this is thinking about how these personal practices and daily actions can contribute to the larger project of collective liberation, of building a more just and peaceful world. There's this quote from Rachel Naomi Remen from an On Being interview where she said, and she's a doctor, a medical doctor, and a teacher and a healer. And she said, heal the part of the world that touches you. So again, we can feel like we need to heal everything, but what is right in front of us? You know, what is touching us? What can we touch? And what can we heal? And we don't need to wait to do that. You know, we have everything we need to begin trying to do that right now. And this connects to the idea that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about, that everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. And as someone who teaches in a university, I love college, you know, I love studying, I love college, but don't wait until you have a degree to go out and do the work. Please do come see us at UPeace. I welcome you all to Costa Rica to come to the University for Peace. But we don't need a degree. We can always develop more skills, of course, but we can start right now with what we have and exactly where we are. Then there's this question of who are you? From your positionality, from your identity, your lineage, whatever privilege you have along racial or class or gender or other lines, how can you wield that power and privilege for good and for a greater sense of justice? What risks can you take? What resources and connections do you have? What skills can you offer? And how might you use your positionality to be an ally and an advocate? And most importantly, no matter who you are, listening to and following the lead of those who are most impacted by whatever issue it is and offering your support. On the left-hand side, I have a meme that's been circulating recently that says, and it's by the Instagram account is called The Reclaimed. And it says, this is a reminder, there are so many ways to resist. Some folks will hit the streets, some will call elected officials, some will run for office, some will raise money, some folks will bail out protesters, some folks will work pro bono, some folks will boycott, some will shop local, small, marginalized owned businesses, some folks will donate, some will volunteer. All of those folks are doing the work, and we need everyone in their own lane. It all matters. So I'm going to share these frameworks very briefly, and it's probably going to be painful because I could, there's so much to share with them, but I'm hoping in briefly introducing them, when we move into breakout rooms, you might be able to pull up the links and look at them closer and see where you fit. So the first framework, and we're going to move into breakout rooms soon, as a side note. The first framework comes from the Metta Center for Nonviolence, and it's called the Roadmap. So you see these three concentric circles. It starts with person power, which is this inner power, and something that we can always work on, right? Constructive program, building the world we want, also what we can always work on, and then nonviolent resistance in the outer ring. And then you see these different areas of new story creation, peace, democracy and social justice, vibrant and needs-based economies, climate protection and environment. And so the Metta Center encourages people to find themselves in this map and orient your work in this broader vision of creating a more nonviolent world. The part, so the 5 points there are their person power framework. So unplugging from commercial mass media, learn everything you can about nonviolence, take up a spiritual practice if you don't already have one, rehumanize anytime possible, and get involved. Find where your gifts meet the needs of the moment and the movement and offer what you can. So again, just very briefly sharing about this, and I'll put the link in the chat as well. This other framework I wanted to share is Eva Ayer's social change ecosystem map. And so you see equity, liberation, justice, and solidarity in the middle. And then she has all these different roles that people can play. And I have a link there to her Substack post from today called All of Us. And she was talking about how, right now in the United States, we're seeing a lot around disruption, and that is absolutely necessary. Like there needs to be a lot of disruption and frontline response. But in her post, she also shares, like, we need disruption and all of these other roles too. And so again, I'll share that link so that you can take a closer look, and that'll be one of the things that we explore in breakout rooms. Before we move into breakout rooms, I wanted to add 2 more practices of imagination and hope as essential everyday peace and nonviolence practices. We have to imagine the world we want. And Adrienne Marie Brown in Emergent Strategy said, we are living now inside the imagination of people who thought economic disparity and environmental destruction were acceptable costs for their power. It is our right and responsibility to write ourselves into the future. All organizing is science fiction. And she also puts forth this idea of imagination collaboration, that we need to imagine with people who are different from us in all ways, because we can only see part of the vision, but together we can create a vision that works for everybody. And I really see this as a vital practice, and many of us are not. I always do these exercises with students, and they're always shocked at how hard it is for them to imagine something beyond a dystopian future. And so it really is a practice. And also connects to rest. And Tricia Hersey of the Nhat Ministry shares this idea and practice of rest as resistance. And I recommend looking at her body of work and practicing rest as resistance. It's very hard for us to imagine and dream, again, when we're burnt out, when we're too tired. Like our imaginations need us to physically rest. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about hope and practicing active hope. This is imagining the world that we want and building it now. This is the way that Joanna Macy talks about active hope. It's not an idea, it's something we do through action. And I really recommend her book, Active Hope, as well as Rebecca Solnit's work, Hope in the Dark. I wanted to share this quote from Greta Thunberg as she returned to Europe after the attempt to break the blockade to Gaza for humanitarian aid. And she said, the point is, whatever the odds are, we have to keep trying, because right now, when you look at the state of the world, everything feels meaningless. But unless you try to do everything you can, that's when we lose our hope, no? And so this sense that hope is action, like we generate hope with the way that we act in the world. This is a summary slide. You don't need to read it now. All of these slides will be available, but this is the list of practices that I've shared tonight, and I hope at least some little nugget was useful for you. And from here, we're going to move into breakout rooms.